Good evening. You're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Vladimir Putin seems to be mocking the West and its silence. That's the message from Volodymyr Zelenskyy in the wake of a brutal overnight air assault on the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, just 70 kilometres from the Polish border. As we go to air tonight, these are our top stories. Georgia faces the aftermath of a turbulent night on Tbilisi's streets. A win for populists in the Czech Republic, but can they now form a government? And floods, downpours and blizzards hit Europe. 6 people are dead and tens of thousands have been left without power after Russia launched a barrage of drones and missiles at Lviv, a western city widely regarded as being one of the safest in wartime Ukraine. The fatal attack has prompted President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to call out the West, saying there's no adequate response from the international community. Let's go live to Kyiv now, where our correspondent Alex Cadier is standing by. Good evening, Alex. So how has the fallout from this attack played out?
Well, good evening, Aaron. Still that death toll being counted. You rightly mentioned 6 people were killed, 4 of those in the region around Lviv. An entire family killed, we understand, in a drone strike, including a 15-year-old girl. The kind of death toll that has become all too familiar in these overnight Russian attacks. You rightly mentioned that Lviv and the region around it are deemed to be safer because they are further away from Russian launch sites, but nevertheless they were not spared by the more than 50 missiles and 500 drones fired overnight, the majority of which, of course, intercepted by the Ukrainian Air Force. That's according to the Ukrainian Air Force, downing 478 targets. But nevertheless, 57 drones made it to their targets across 20 different locations. That particular region sensitive for a number of reasons. Still a large displaced civilian population close to that Polish border. It prompted Poland to scramble jets over in its airspace to make sure there were no further Russian drone incursions like we've seen in the past. But clearly a source of frustration from President Zelenskyy that these attacks are still allowed to happen. He points out the fact that thousands of Western-made components would have been used in the weapons, including components from the US, the UK, Germany, Switzerland and elsewhere. Clearly, President Zelenskyy, in an address, quite frustrated.
Sadly, there's no strong, adequate response from the international community to what's happening. Constant escalation and brazenness of these strikes. Russian President Vladimir Putin is doing it and seems to mock the West and its silence and lack of strong actions in response. Russia has rejected every proposal to end the war or even to halt the strikes. It's blatantly trying to destroy our civilian infrastructure, especially now ahead of winter. Gas facilities, power plants, and transmission systems. Zero real reaction from the world.
So clearly there, President Zelenskyy expressing his frustration. At the same time, we've heard from the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, who said that any delivery of long-range missiles, Tomahawk missiles, to Ukraine would destroy Russia's relationship with the United States, something that he says he expressed directly to President Trump. So clearly, damage in Ukraine, those death tolls continuing to rise across the country in these brutal Russian attacks. The local authorities in the Lviv region saying it was the largest attack on that region since the start of the full-scale invasion, and that military targets were not near some of the strike areas for these drones. But more frustration from Ukraine, asking for air defenses, asking for support from Western partners. For now, the Ukrainian perspective, according to President Zelenskyy, is that the West is being mocked by Russia as these attacks continue across the country. Aaron.
Alex Cadier in Kyiv, thank you. And as the war in Ukraine continues, Beijing and Pyongyang are doubling down on their support for Russia's full-scale invasion, including intelligence sharing and arms production. At the same time, Russian President Vladimir Putin insists relations between Moscow and Washington could fall apart if Tomahawk missiles are delivered to Kyiv. Randy Potts explains.
3.5 years into Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a military alliance is solidifying in the east. According to new intelligence and public speeches, and in spite of protests from European leaders, China and North Korea are doubling down on their military support for Russia. On Saturday, an official from Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service said China is providing intelligence to Russia which allows Moscow to better guide its missiles striking inside Ukraine.
There is evidence of high level of cooperation between Russia and China in conducting satellite reconnaissance of the territory of Ukraine in order to identify and further explore strategic objects for targeting.
Oleg Alexandrov also said China is passing on satellite intelligence on Ukrainian targets, including those benefiting from foreign investment. A recent Russian missile strike on a U.S.-owned appliance factory in western Ukraine injured 15 people. This new development follows President Volodymyr Zelenskyy saying last April that China was supplying weapons and gunpowder to Russia and likely producing weapons on Russian territory. Next door, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un announced Sunday at a new weapons exhibition that Pyongyang is dedicating strategic military assets to counter what it calls the increasing presence of U.S. military forces in South Korea.
In direct proportion to the buildup of U.S. forces in Korea, our strategic interest in the region has also increased, and we have accordingly allocated special assets to key targets of interest. I believe our enemies should be concerned about the direction their security environment is evolving.
Among the weapons displayed at the exhibition was the Hwasong-11 short-range ballistic missile. This particular missile has drawn international attention, with Ukrainian and Western officials alleging its delivery to Russia and subsequent use by Moscow in attacks against Ukraine. Thus far, Kim's public support for the Russian army consists of military planning, ammunition, and over 10,000 North Korean soldiers. Though North Korea is also publicly developing a well-funded drone program, there is as yet no evidence North Korean drones are being used in Ukraine or elsewhere in Europe. In a clear departure from the visibly friendly relations between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska this August, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance says Washington is now considering a Ukrainian request to obtain long-range tomahawks that could strike deep into Russia, including Moscow. In response, video was released on Sunday of Putin saying if the United States supplied Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine for long-range strikes deep into Russia, it could sour Moscow's relationship with Washington.
There were issues raised, such as discussions about the supply of new weapon systems to Ukraine, including long-range and high-precision systems like Tomahawks. I have already said that this will lead to the destruction of our relations, or at least the positive trends that have emerged in these relations.
With Russian forces advancing in Ukraine, allegedly Russian drones flying in NATO airspace, Beijing and Pyongyang ramping up military production, and now Washington talking about direct participation in striking deep into the world's biggest nuclear power, peace seems further off than any other time this year. This military alliance might not just be in the East, as late on Sunday, Reuters reports it gained exclusive access to a sensitive U.S. diplomatic cable. In it, the U.S. says it will soon announce Cuba is actively supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine. For TVP World, Randy Potts.
Georgia's ruling party, often seen as being pro-Russian, is accusing protesters of attempting to overthrow the government and says the European Union is interfering in their country's politics. It comes after a night of turmoil on the streets of the capital, Tbilisi, as police clashed with demonstrators who were trying to storm the presidential palace. Our correspondent Don Arleth has more.
Tens of thousands of people took to the streets in Georgia last night to protest the local elections, and actually most of the opposition parties and the protesters boycotted these elections, not going to the polls, not taking participation in the vote. Of course, this is their way of showing that the government is illegitimate. That's what they claim. We saw scenes culminate here in front of the presidential palace of violence where the protesters tried to storm the building. They ripped down the barriers, and we saw also the heavy police reaction using water cannons and tear gas to disperse protesters, which later culminated in a very peaceful gathering in front of the parliament. Now, Georgia is at a bit of a crossroads right now. They've been so for 311 days now. There are still protests taking place in front of the parliament, and the protesters are demanding the removal of the government because they claim this government is pro-Russian and illegitimate and stomping on their rights and, of course, not allowing the freedom of expression and normal freedoms that we see in a democracy. This all started when the government broke off accession talks to the European Union, and this is why people have been protesting for so many days now here in Georgia. But whether these protests will cause any real change in the government or allow the government or make the government step down is yet to be seen. Of course, there are no real leaders. There is no clear leadership from the opposition, which makes this struggle and these protests very difficult to culminate in any meaningful action here in Georgia. We will see whether these protests continue or not, or whether there will be any change in government in the time to come. But for now, these attempts to topple the government have been unsuccessful. Reporting from Tbilisi, Don Arleth, TVP World.
To the Czech Republic now, where the political dust is settling following this weekend's parliamentary election. But despite billionaire businessman Andrej Babiš winning the vote, his populist ANO party fell short of a total majority. As Alexandra Bulenda reports, coalition talks are now on the horizon, with far-right and anti-establishment forces picking up support.
Populists may have won the night, but the day after paints a far more divided picture. The Czech Republic wakes up politically split down the middle, with coalition math more complicated than ever. While Andrej Babiš's ANO surged past 34%, gaining nearly 8 points since 2021, it did so by cannibalizing its own allies, the far-right SPD party and the fragmented left. The governing bloc of Spolu, Mayors and Pirates still holds exactly what it did 4 years ago, that is 43.4% combined. Now, outgoing Prime Minister Petr Fiala conceded defeat, but not without warning what's at stake.
In the coming months and years, we must do everything we can to offer hope to those who don't want populists and extremists ruling our country and provide them with a realistic path to victory over these political forces.
And the result is already resonating beyond Czech borders, and here's what some far-right leaders had to say.
Congratulations, my dear friend Andrej Babiš. You will make the Czech Republic stronger. We patriots are winning all over Europe. Truth has prevailed. Andrej Babiš has won the Czech parliamentary elections with a convincing lead. A big step for the Czech Republic. Good news for Europe. Congratulations, Andrej.
Congratulations to Andrej Babiš and the ANO party, who have won a landslide victory in the Czech Republic's parliamentary elections. Across Europe, patriotic parties are being called to power by people who want to regain their freedom and prosperity.
Now, coalition building might be harder than it looks. The Pirates have ruled out any potential talks with ANO, SPD or motorists whatsoever, cutting off any potential key alliances. And here's what the leader of Pirates had to say.
Our post-election strategy is absolutely clear. We will not join forces with ANO. We will not join forces with motorists for themselves. And we will not join forces with SPD.
Babiš met with President Petr Pavel at Prague Castle, driving himself in his ANO-branded campaign van. The moment splashed across Czech media symbolized his populist style, but the president made it clear that this is not yet a done deal. Before the vote, President Pavel told TVP World on Friday that he would use his constitutional powers now to act as counterbalance to any potential prime minister and to keep the Czech real and anchored in NATO and the EU and scrutinize Babiš's business ties before granting a mandate to govern. And today, the scrutiny begins, as it seems. So by 10 a.m., Fiala arrived for his own round of consultations, and with Spolu still holding a sizable bloc, the path forward is far from settled. So with a fragmented parliament, hardened political red lines, and European populists already rallying behind Babiš, the Czech Republic stands at political crossroads. From Prague for TVP World, I'm Alexandra Bulenda.
Europe is starting to speak with Warsaw's voice on migration. This from Poland's Interior Minister as EU officials vow to crack down on asylum seekers and illegal crossings. Poland has announced it will continue using border checkpoints over security concerns. Our defence correspondent Zuzana Jurek has more.
At the European Interior Ministers Summit on migration in Munich, one sentiment reverberated especially loud.
We welcome any tightening of migration policy. We are pleased that the EU is beginning to speak with a Polish voice and is starting to talk about tightening this migration policy. The Polish approach can be seen month after month as it is adopted by successive governments in successive countries. And today we got the impression that the European Parliament should act even faster and more intensively because there is no time. We must act.
This comes just 2 days after the Polish Prime Minister Tusk flagged on the sidelines of the informal leaders summit in the Danish capital of Copenhagen that Poland will extend the checkpoints on its borders.
We decided to close the border with Germany due to these cases of redirection of illegal migrants. They were not numerous, but they were very irritating and caused a lot of emotion on our side. These instances appear to have come to an end. As you know, the method we adopted was intended to end this tug of war at the border over illegal migrants. This matter has now been resolved, but we will continue to use these controls to prevent this mechanism from returning.
Warsaw initially moved to install the checkpoints on 2 of its borders, with Germany and Lithuania in July, citing security concerns over illegal migrant crossings. But as experts note, the reasoning behind this closure is more complicated than just security.
So there's a big difference between the Polish-German situation and the Polish-Lithuanian situation, because this exposure to the external EU traffic coming in is much greater on the northeastern border.
And it is this perceived weaponization of migration by the Minsk and Moscow regimes which pushed Europe to prioritize tightening migration policy. On Saturday, EU policymakers emphasized some of the successes to date.
The pressure is still high in all our neighboring countries when it comes to migration. And there have been many positive developments in recent weeks and months. You mentioned a few figures from Germany. We have seen a reduction in illegal border crossings across Europe of over 20% overall.
But some experts mirror, however, the sentiments presented by Poland. The bloc still has a long way to go in order to make its jurisdiction effective.
What is really important now is to coordinate those policy choices and to produce a policy on the EU level that would be addressing the concerns of the EU citizens and also enabled the mechanisms within the EU that would, on the one hand, address those concerns, but on the other also enable the free movement of people.
For TVP World, Zuzana Jurek.
Strong winds and heavy rain have killed at least 3 people and caused widespread damage as Storm Amy swept through northern Europe. Extreme weather also hit the Balkans, marked by heavy snowfall. Jeremy Przewodniuk has more.
This is the aftermath of Storm Amy, a powerful weather system that swept across northern Europe. Citizens of this French town now face the challenge of dealing with the trail left behind by the elements.
You can see both parts of the roof got blown away. One's right here and the other landed out in the street about 50 meters away. We were pretty shocked. I'm the mayor and it's our family home, so it's really hard to see our house like this.
The storm killed 2 people in its wake in France.
It's really impressive. I've been a student here for a few years, and sure, we're used to strong winds, but this one's really powerful.
Amy made its way also to the British Isles, with gusts reaching speed of more than 150 kilometers per hour. The result, 1 person dead, more than 200,000 properties in Ireland alone left without power, and roads and railway lines blocked by fallen trees. A similar scenario unfolded in Norway.
Today, our roof woke me up. Unfortunately, we don't have it anymore. It's in our garden. We woke up to a crazy rumble at 7 a.m. and then 70% of our roof was in the garden.
But that's not the end of extreme weather in Europe. Floods and early snow hit southern Europe as well.
When we came here, it felt like summer, and when we leave, it feels like winter. It took us by surprise. We weren't prepared for this weather.
Heavy early snowfall has caused widespread disruption across the Western Balkans, particularly in Serbia and Bosnia. Experts say that extreme weather conditions can be linked to climate change. For TVP World, Jeremy Chowodniuk.
We return now to Georgia, and joining me to unpack this developing story is Shota Gavaneria, Senior Fellow at the Economic Policy Research Centre. Good evening, sir.
Hello. Thank you for your interest.
A pleasure to have you. Can I begin in Tbilisi? As we sit here tonight, what is the feeling on the ground?
Well, actually, the feelings on the ground are mixed because what we have been looking at in this last few months, is a huge legitimacy crisis that the Georgian Dream is in. Basically, to start from a bigger picture, we do a very well established, known and studied Russian model, the extension of the Russian regime in Georgia, Tbilisi. So expectations from the elections were not that, positive or optimistic from the people who know the situation on the ground. We know that there is an effective state capture in place. We know that the Georgian Dream regime has been putting forward the combination of coercion, vote buying, and propaganda to kind of create the uneven environment in which elections are basically not possible. You cannot call this elections because this has been the forceful process in which, the laws have been twisted beforehand and prepared for this unfair competition. The leaders of the opposition are in jail. The civil society organizations that have been usually part of this election process, preparations for the election and monitoring the election, they're under enormous legal, financial pressure and coercion from the government. So they were not able to participate in the process. And the media is under enormous pressure. Well, what we can say here is that there was nothing much to be expected to start with. Nothing much has changed. The people in the streets are basically protesting the legitimacy crisis that the Georgian Dream has, and there is nothing that is changed from this perspective.
And many will have seen those pictures from the attempted storming of the presidential palace last night, kind of thinking, what is going on in Georgia? Do you think this helps or hinders the protesters' cause?
Well, it once again underlines the desperate situation in Georgia, because it has been almost a year that the people in massive numbers are protesting against the rigged parliamentary elections. And what we have seen as a response from the government is more and more coercion and more violence from day to day, and then the people that has been out in the streets, most of the people were basically there to show their distrust towards the election process. They were there to tell the government that basically what they're trying to sell as the elections, it's basically a circus. It cannot legitimize any official that comes to the office through this illegitimate process, and that was the main goal of most of the people, that hundreds of people, thousands of people that were there in the street. Well, then there were some incidents, of course, and there has been some unforeseen developments in some parts of, managing the expectations of some groups of the people there on the ground. But still, I would still focus on the bigger picture. And if we see what's going on today in Tbilisi, is that people are coming back to the same place they have been standing for months and saying the same thing, saying the very same thing. These details and this shows that the government is trying to suggest as the response to this big political and legitimacy crisis will not change anything. They will be there until their voice is heard, and they will be in this peaceful protest. And the vast majority of the civil society, of the people that are there on the ground, they're basically going to proceed with the peaceful protest. But what we see from the government side, again, is they have been arresting hundreds of people. They will use these incidents, unfortunately, to get people out of their way, people that have been problematic for them, because they're very well established in their peaceful protest. And then they will try to start this witch hunt now to connect everybody and everything that they don't like to this incidents that you're referring to. So they will, we see the signs that they're using this already for basically whitewashing or firming their conspiracy theories, which they have polluted Georgian information space with.
Well, precisely on that, is there a worry now that this attempted sort of storming of the palace or this incident gives the Georgian Dream Party an ability to prosecute, to crack down harder on dissent and to dismiss the protesters?
Absolutely, but they didn't need much reason for that anyway. What we have seen through the last month is that they're doing it anyway. Whether they have a reason for that or not, they have the Georgian State Security Service, Ministry of Internal Affairs have been coming up with that conspiracy theories every time, even when there was not even a little sparkle of evidence or a basis for that. They have been going after the people that are involved in these protests and dissent for no reason. Well, that now they have a little bit more to show to their supporters, maybe some little part of their supporters that still believe that Georgian Dream is basically a political party rather than an authoritarian regime, which is an extension of Putin's regime. These people will still see footage, these videos, and Georgian Dream has now more ammunition for their propaganda campaigns and disinformation campaigns. That's obvious. But in terms of the outcome of all this, it's going to be the same, because they have been sending innocent people to jail anyway, and that's what they will continue doing now, but with more confidence, I guess.
You mentioned there the Georgian Dream Party being an extension of Putin's regime. To be clear, in your view, has the West lost Georgia to Russia?
Well, right now, Georgia has lost itself, I would say. We're out of the constitutional process. The regime that is ruling Georgia right now is not a legitimate party. They cannot rule the country, and they cannot rule Georgian society as a whole. So they have this handful of people that they control for one reason or another, and then they have another handful of people that they have scared to death, and they're not doing anything. They're not saying anything. They just stay at home and they don't want to participate in the political process. And this gives them the opportunity to create the false picture that they are basically running and governing the country, but they can't, because the most active part of Georgia's society is against Russia. It's against Georgian Dream's policies that are on the record officially taking the country away from European Union, away from NATO, away from the United States, all our Western partners, that has been the only guarantee for Georgia's sovereignty and prosperity for so long. So that's the main core of the problem. That basically they are cheating on the social contract. Nobody, even their supporters, are not ready to vote for the openly pro-Russian government. That's why they're still kind of trying to confuse as many people as possible. On one hand, they are demonizing European Union. On the other hand, in the same news cycle, they're saying that they will still apply for the EU membership in 2030. It doesn't make sense unless you know how Russian propaganda works, right? For Russian propaganda, that's fine, that's okay. You can say one thing today, another thing tomorrow, which are totally contradictory, but in the bigger picture, it doesn't matter because your objective is to confuse as many people as possible. Their objective is not for the people to believe in something. Their objective is for the people to believe in nothing. And then that gives them the opportunity to rule with this, demotivated and disoriented masses much more easier. But that's not their playbook. It's a Russian playbook that has been effective in Russia, then in Belarus, and now we see it happening in Georgia. One by one, step by step, the same pattern.
Shota Gavineria, Senior Fellow at the Economic Policy Research Centre. Thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you.
And that's all for World News Tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.